Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about compound interest. Yesterday, I just want to review a little bit first. We talked simple interest. And so for that, remember I gave the example of me borrowing $100 from the bank at a 10% interest rate. And remember, when we're converting between percents and decimals, that we can slide that decimal place 2 spots to the left because when I'm thinking of percentages, that's 10% out of 100% because percents are always out of 100. And when I'm looking at one whole, this would represent 1/10, right? Or 1/10 of that one whole. So in yesterday's example, I borrowed $100 and it was at a 10% interest rate, which means 1/10 of 100, which is 10. So every year I was adding another group of 10 to my 100. So year 1, I had $110. Year 2, I had $120. Year 3, I had $130, right? And we just kept adding groups of 10 every time until we got to 10 years. Okay, and at that point, I had 10 groups of 10 plus my original 100. Okay, so I had $200 total. So now with compound interest, you still have the same amount and you still have your rate, your 10% rate, but this time we're going to be, instead of tallying off of the original amount, the principal amount every single time, we're going to be tallying off the new amount. So in year 1, right, if they gave me the $100, I gave the 100 back to them, I would still only owe $100. In year 1, I would have my $100 plus I would have that 10% interest rate, which would give me $110, right? So very similar start to what we saw with simple interest. Here's where it gets a little bit more complicated though. In year 2, instead of calculating from my principal, I have to calculate from the new amount. Okay, so basically I'm taking my $110 that I had before that I had to pay back, and I have to add it to, I have to calculate what this new percentage would be. So I take my 10% and I multiply it by that amount that I just had, my 110. Okay, so then remember, here's a different way that we could write it. We could have 110 plus 0.1 times 110. Okay, and when we put that into our calculator to calculate it, that would equal 121. Okay, so if we were to compare, here's year 2, I have $121 that I have to repay. And in my simple interest after year 2, I had $120 to pay. So really, I mean, it's not that much more, right? It's $1 more. That's not too bad. But let's watch what happens as we increase, okay? So let's do year 3. So year 3, I look, okay, how much did I have in year 2? 121 that I had to pay back. And I have to add my 10% again to it and multiply it by my 121. Okay, so another way, remember that we could write this like when we type it in our calculator, calculate that to our decimal, to our decimal. Okay, and now when I go ahead and multiply and figure this out, it would equal 133 point something. We're just going to round that to 133. Okay, so now if we compare year 3 now with our compound interest to our year 3 here, I can see, now I am gaining even more money, right? Now I have to pay $3 extra. Back here, I only had to pay 1. So my rate is changing, or not my rate, but the amount that it's going up by each time is changing, like the dollar amount. Okay. So another way that we can kind of calculate it, and we're not going to ask you to do a ton of this, but you will see it later on, is I can take my original principal and I can multiply it, instead of multiplying it by 0.1 every single time, I can multiply it by 1.1. And then instead of having to, because I need to do this like every single year, I can multiply it by the year. So in this case, if it was 3 years, right, for this guy, then I would just do it to the third, all right? And so we would just keep doing that, changing only that number because our interest rate stays the same and our principal amount stays the same. So basically, after 10 years, let's figure out after 10 years what that would look like. Well, I would have to do 100, right, times my 1.1 to the 10th power because that's how many years I was borrowing my interest or my money. So I'm running out of space. I'm going to write it over here. Okay, so when I punch that in on my calculator, I would get $259. Okay, now remember, of that money, 100 of it, right, was the amount that I borrowed. And the rest of it, the other $159, was the interest. So when we look at comparing simple interest versus compound interest, we can see this, right? The total goes up a lot faster because you're always multiplying using the new amount that you're calculated from the previous year instead of the original $100 every single time. So if we think about this in terms of a bank loan, I would much rather have a simple interest amount, because as long as the rate was the same, which is where they sometimes get you, you'll learn that as an adult. But as long as the rate is the same, I would always choose simple interest, because it's going to be adding a smaller amount every time. If it's 10%, I just have to add $10 every single year, versus this where they're always recalculating based on the new year's total amount. Okay, it's going to add up a lot faster. It's like exponentially larger. So I just kind of want you to understand the difference between these two. I don't care as much about you being able to calculate using this method, but I do want you to understand the differences between these two and how they work. So if you keep having questions, please let me know. Thank you.